I'm Peggy Reisher. I'm the Executive Director for the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska, and here in Lincoln, Nebraska, a long ways from you guys. My primary role as Executive Director is to kind of help run our nonprofit Brain Injury Alliance. I have a master's in social work. I had worked for 14 years at a rehab hospital called Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital, where my primary role was to help with transitioning families after they left the hospital setting back into the community. Throughout those years, I certainly found that there weren't a lot of services to discharge folks to, so kind of took it personally in figuring out, okay, instead of looking over my shoulder and figuring out who's going to fix this, you kind of get to the point where you look in the mirror and go, well, maybe I should do something about that. So we've been working the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska has been around since about 2010, and what we're just trying to do is create some systems change and increase kind of brain injury awareness in our state. At this point in time, Nebraska is one of those states that does not have any state dollars specifically going to brain injury, so a lot of what we do is legislative work, but also partnering with organizations such as Health and Human Services, which has some block grant dollars to work on injury prevention. So we've been very thankful over the years to have individuals like Peg, who's not here with me today, but to help provide some funding for the work that we're doing. So on that note, Devin, do you think it's okay to go ahead and get started, or do you want me to wait a few more minutes?
Okay, yeah, I think we're go ahead and we're good to get started. Let's go ahead and move on into presentation view, and we should be set.
Okay. Again, I wish Peg could have been here with me today, but I will cover her parts of the slides. We kind of sometimes get joked as being Peg squared, which is, we always remember each other's name. All right, so the injury, and this is where Peg would have presented from Health and Human Services, but her primary, and you're going to see that I'm looking away from my camera because I'm looking at the slides that you guys are, but the injury prevention program's primary priorities that they've been focusing on here in Nebraska is brain injury as well as intimate partner violence prevention. And so when we had approached, when Peg was telling me that those are some priorities that they had, I figured, well, that's stuff we could certainly work with her on. Here in Nebraska, there's a strong coalition working on domestic violence and intimate partner violence, but they've never really historically looked at brain injury. So that's what we wanted to do, is take the opportunity to study that a little bit more. And from a brain injury alliance perspective, what we've been doing, because we don't have state funding, we tend to go kind of look for special populations that we anticipate that those numbers of individuals with brain injury is fairly high. And again, given the grant opportunity here, it was a good match for us as well as for Peg. So the next set of slides will be kind of just talking about the intersection between brain injury and domestic violence. As I looked at the other topics that were part of this day-long webinar, it looks like you guys probably have quite a bit of information just about brain injury, so I will not go into a ton of detail about that, expecting that many of you already know about it, but you're going to see that I'm also going to hit some kind of high-level things that we were sharing with the shelters. And this is the high-end stuff. Just what is a brain injury? Traumatic brain injury. Many of you probably already know this, but it's that injury that's caused by a blow or to the head or to the neck. It can be the result of a motor vehicle accident, falls. Assaults is really the area that we were focusing on as we did our domestic violence work. Acquired brain injury, that was another thing that when we started this project, we really wanted to hit home with the shelters that we were working with, or the domestic violence programs, to describe, one would kind of assume, okay, if you're getting beaten and battered and thrown around, you're going to be looking for traumatic brain injury. But the effects of the acquired brain injury, the anoxic injury, the lack of oxygen after strangulation or choking can certainly play a huge factor into how some of the individuals were doing within those domestic violence programs. So we spent quite a bit of time chatting or educating the programs about acquired brain injury also. As we've gone, and some of you may already know this too, but I just find this to be such an interesting slide. I don't know about your state, but here in Nebraska, we see a lot of people walking around with pink ribbons and caring a lot about breast cancer, as they should. HIV, spinal cord injuries, multiple sclerosis, we hear a lot about that in our state. But traumatic brain injuries, it just seems like it doesn't get the chatter, it doesn't get the recognition that some of these other illnesses, disabilities, or whatever you want to call them do. And yet, according to the slide from the Brain Injury Association of America, those numbers of traumatic brain injury are much higher than breast cancer awareness, HIV, spinal cord injury, and MS altogether. What is domestic violence? I have to admit, when I first started this, I was one of those that I don't claim to be a domestic violence specialist by any means. Social workers, spent most of her career in the hospitals, seen people with domestic violence, but didn't claim to be able to speak domestic violence ease very well. We've learned a lot from each other over the course of this project. This is a slide directly from the folks that are from the programs we've worked with, just saying, what is domestic violence? It's that pattern of physical assaults, threats, or cohesive behaviors that are used to maintain control over a current or intimate partner. They really, as we've talked with them, it's really about it's a crime of power and control. It's not necessarily about somebody being angry or frustrated. It's a control issue. And also, much like brain injury, domestic violence does not have any boundaries. It can be any age, gender, religion, sexual orientation, level of education. As you hear me go through this presentation, you're going to hear me talk a lot about the women, the ladies. I don't mean to minimize and say that that's not, that domestic violence and brain injury is not also happening in men. I think just for the ease, forgive me for not including men, as I don't always say she and he, but know that it certainly happens amongst the male population too. Common clues to domestic violence. Again, these are some slides that we've borrowed from our domestic violence partners. Things that when we go in and do some training with the hospitals, talking to them about what they should be looking at in the ER. These are, excuse me, these are examples of things that we're talking to them about. Looking for signs of individuals constantly canceling plans, always worrying about making their partner angry, giving up in activities that are super important to them, knowing that it might have a trigger effect on their abuser. We're certainly talking about looking for the signs, the bruises, the marks around their neck, looking for the physical abuse. And also just talking with the programs about the need to always be available to the partner at all times. I know as we did a training just last week, there was some discussion from our domestic violence partner who did her part of the training, talking about how the abuser, they were in the ER, for example, and the abuser had called his mom and said, she's heading to the ER, why don't you go there with her? And the ER had asked all the questions, about domestic violence, and she was, pretty silent about it. She didn't say anything until finally they had an opportunity for her to go out, and the abuser's mom had left, and that's when she just kind of, well, this is what's going on at our house, and was able to share information. So even though it might have felt like that was a safe spot to share information because it was with another female, somebody who appeared to care about her, the lady being abused definitely knew that that wasn't a safe spot and a safe time to do that. So she was able to finally do that with staff after, I think that she had to use had to get some blood tests or go down the hall for something, and that's when she was able to share the information. When we look at brain injury and domestic violence, I think we often this is often overlooked by medical providers and law enforcement, first responders. So here in Nebraska, that's one of the areas that we've been really trying to hit, is a lot of training with those individuals or those groups. It can certainly, brain injury has a significant effect on the responsiveness, their ability to utilize resources to know that, okay, I need to tap into this. The other thing we oftentimes talk about is in domestic violence, 1 in 4 women will experience a severe physical violence because of violence by their partner. It's a lot of ladies and men, but just statistically, we're looking at 1 in 4. And the other thing with brain injury is oftentimes just individuals are unaware of it. They just aren't, people don't necessarily, I think especially in this population, they aren't paying attention to the fact that, yeah, I've had a brain injury. If you ask them a series of questions, say, have you had a brain injury? Most of these ladies are not identifying as such. But as you hear from me later on, we'll be going over a screen, which kind of helps pull that information out. So the project, this was grant funded by Peg's grant. And I just want to share with you a little bit about what we did with it. This was actually done in 2016. It was just a few months, really quick amount of time that we were given. But what we did is we went into these different programs, provided some brain injury 101, about 90 minutes worth of information about brain injury. We went over symptomology, everyday support, and then what. And so the actual presentation we gave them, again, I won't go into a lot of this detail, but these are some key slides that we had pulled and wanted to make sure that the shelter programs or the domestic violence programs were aware of how the brain works. We talked about the different areas of the brain and what's going to be affected. We talked a lot about oxygen deprivation, the strangulation, and what's that mean. And if a person goes without oxygen for a certain amount of time, it's really gonna affect their memory centers. And if individuals are dealing with that on a weekly, monthly, whatever basis, if it's happening multiple times, then that's gonna affect how are they doing with being able to problem solve and remember information. So when we actually did, and again, I'll go through this more, but with our actual screening project, we were sure to ask questions about strangulation and choking. Some of the symptom categories we also shared with the programs is just, here's what brain injury looks like. When we started off with this training, the lady that had helped me with this training, her name was Dr. Kate Higgins, and her and I had partnered quite a bit on doing concussion management and training for schools. And she actually worked at the university here in Nebraska as part of what we call here in Nebraska CB3, Center for Brain Biology and Behavior, again, studying a lot about sports injuries. And we utilized a lot of that information in talking with the domestic violence programs to say, this is what brain injury looks like. Here's what concussion looks like. We didn't go into a lot of detail about the more severe injury, but really focusing a lot on more of the mild injury. We also spent some time talking with them about post-concussive syndrome. Again, keeping in mind that if in the sports world, in the youth world, anyway, here in Nebraska, we're always preaching to them, it's like, kind of when in doubt, sit them out. And they don't go back to play, they don't go back to return to learn until they have been cleared, and there's a progression with it. Recognizing that a lot of these individuals within those shelters were not necessarily getting time or somebody monitoring or making sure that they were doing well. So again, kind of talking to them about what are some of the post-concussive syndromes. How is it that after, if that mild injury doesn't resolve itself in that 4 weeks or whatever, what could it look like? And this is also some of the same information that we hear about veterans returning with brain injury too. Again, and trauma and PTSD. I think it's the really tricky part about working with this population is, how much of it's brain injury, how much of it is just PTSD. They've been battered and beaten and strangled. How are you going to know? Is it brain injury? Is it PTSD? The trauma? Because as you can see from this slide, there's so many things that overlap. And I know in some of the work that we've also done with veterans in our state, same thing. We're talking with, as we go out and do brain injury and PTSD training for or for veterans, it's the same thing. Which is it? Traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and oftentimes have to kind of start teasing it out and figuring out, okay, what strategies can we do to help improve? And because there are different strategies that can help with those different mechanisms of why they're having these difficulties. And you know, and I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, it's just synergistic. This is, which is it? You know, ladies dealing with this, their anxiety is high. You know, the environmental stressors. Do I have a place to sleep? What am I going to do with my children? What am I going to do with my job? Where's my insurance coming from? Do I leave them? Do I not? You know, then there's substance abuse added on top of that, anxiety. So again, it becomes really challenging. Guess what we really wanted to focus on with this particular project is not that we're going to be able to erase and make it super clear as to whether or not this is all brain injury, but at least get brain injury in the conversation. So frequently, most often, brain injury's not been thought of with this, and it's time to start thinking about it. It's time to start asking questions. Could it be part of their challenges, brain injury, and kind of on that note, we really encourage the ladies to be, thinking, or not the ladies, but some of the staff within those programs, asking themselves, well, why can't she answer these questions? Why is she, why are her responses changing? And giving them some tools in dealing with people with brain injury, really asking for giving them more time to think through things, letting them say, I don't know, making sure that you're checking in for comprehension, and really also encouraging them to really utilize real direct communication and not subtle. Because again, if they're having difficulty with memory and problem solving, some of those symptoms that I shared earlier, then that's going to play a factor into it. Kind of becomes the question: is it a won't or a can't question? And if it's if it's the can't because of brain injury, then you need to be considerate of that, and really to encourage the staff to be thinking about how does, after this training, how is it that these ladies are responding, and how do you need to change your responses? Also, when they look at why is she just so distracted, again, if she's dealing with brain injury, encouraging them to simplify the environment, to control for noise and light that's in their area that they're maybe asking or interviewing questions. Really providing some clear structure and predictable routines is also helpful. Again, these are pretty typical of what we explain and train schools about, and working with kids with brain injury or concussion. Checking in for comprehension. The one thing we also spent quite a bit of time is, like, in some of those programs, they'll maybe give a person a packet of paperwork, and it's like, fill this out and we'll be back later and get through as much as you can. But again, if they've been identified as having a brain injury, that stuff is going to be a lot harder for them to do. So what can we do? What can they do? Some simple strategies that the programs can do to make that a little bit more successful for those ladies. And also recognizing that sometimes after a brain injury, you just need time to rest and take things slow. Again, stuff that we tell our schools and those supporting our youth. If they need a break, give them a break. If they need to rest, that's good. Make that available. Oftentimes, again, memory is a factor here. Why doesn't she remember the conversations we had yesterday? She's lazy. She's, she's not paying attention. But also recognizing, okay, there's different types of memories, encouraging them to write information down to help prioritize things, giving the ladies that are working with some strategies themselves. providing some memory supports. Don't just expect them to make it to an appointment without providing some support to make that happen. Modeling tasks, giving them some checklists. Again, this isn't rocket science. This is just being more aware of, well, maybe they've got some things going on and what can we do to help provide support. So actually screening. So again, that was step one. We wanted to give them some tools. What's brain injury look like? What can we do to help? Just building that awareness piece. Second part of this particular project was then to say, would you do some screening for us? Will you be willing to ask this series of questions? And thankfully, 4 of those programs said yes, they would do that. And the particular screen that we utilized, actually this says on the slide, it says the HELPS brain injury screening tool. I have to be honest, we modified it. We modified it based on feedback that we were getting from the shelters. They liked the tool, but they said there's a few things that's missing. And also keeping in mind the HELP screen is not, as it says on here, not a diagnostic tool, but it just kind of helps trigger some, what is it that we could do or provide some help with. It provided some feedback for the shelters. So the HELP screening, the brain injury screening tools, our results, those that were screening positive were 60%. 60% of the ladies were screening positive for brain injury. Again, not a diagnosis, it wasn't diagnosis, but screening. And the numbers here on the slides kind of explain some of the results, and I'm going to go into more of the details of some of the results here in the next few slides. But so what we have here listed, and some of these next slides, I'm warning you ahead of time, they're pretty busy. But the stuff in red is what I'm going to really probably talk about and kind of point out. Again, average was 60% of the ladies were screening positive. You can see our numbers aren't huge. We recognize that. The Friendship Home in Lincoln, that was more of our metro area, so they had a lot more screens. The Fremont, Columbus, and North Platte here in Nebraska are really small towns. We have to be a little surprised, mystified, I don't know what you want to call it, but the bridge in Fremont, their numbers were so much smaller as being positive than the others. Can't explain it. And I don't know if we were encouraging them to screen everybody, but those numbers are just so much different. But bottom line is we're saying we've got a 60% average. Okay, this next slide, again, these are busy slides, but when we ask the question, the H of the HELP screen is the have you ever been hit or ever been strangled? And the modification that we made to this particular screen, the HELP screen, if you're familiar with it, it does not ask specific questions about choking or strangulation. It also does not ask specific questions about how often. And that was something that the shelter or the programs are very insistent upon, not insistent, but encouraging us to ask those questions. And so glad that we did, because as I go through here, you'll see why. It's like, dang, that's pretty amazing information. But so 92 or 90.2 were saying yes, they've been hit in the head or strangled. With the HELP screen, it also breaks it down to what are some possible reasons for this? Why could you have had a brain injury? And again, it doesn't look at just domestic violence, but it also is looking at childhood injuries, bike accidents, falls, sports injuries, car accidents. When you see this lack of oxygen, that's when it's capturing that strangulation piece. But assault or fight, 94% were saying that yes, they had a hit in the head, and or that was a reason for brain injury. How many times had you been hit in the head or strangled? I think this is the slide that just kind of makes my tummy rumble. When I look at 1 to 3, 40% of them were saying 1 to 3 times, but the 6 or more plus times, 42.9%. again, going back to that analogy of kids in sports, I would probably not let my son go back out on the football field if I known he had 6 or more concussions. Again, as a society, we do a better job kind of monitoring and paying attention to that. And when you look at in this particular population, it's, you know, let's get back, you know, she's doesn't always have an option to sit it out and make changes, and yet 6 or more times is pretty amazing. The E, the helps, is the, have you ever been seen in the emergency room or hospital or by a doctor? And the majority are saying that, nope, don't go to the ER, don't go to the doctor, just kind of dealing with it at home. And again, not surprising in just this population. I think for the most part, folks aren't going to seek medical attention. A sad but true case. The L, did you ever lose consciousness or experience a period of being dazed or confused because of the hit on the head or due to strangulation? 66% are saying, yep, that's happened to me. Again, those numbers are pretty high. If you get to the point where you're actually losing consciousness, and those of you who are brain injury experts, you know this, if that is more in the mild to moderate, or moderate to more severe injuries, that's going to show a greater likelihood of more permanent brain damage. So we are concerned about that. The other thing is, how many times have you felt this way? 57.7% were saying 1 to 3 times. Again, 6 or more times, 36% were relating to that. Did you experience any problems because of the hit to your head or due to strangulation? Overall, 82 or 81.2% were saying, yes, we had these problems. And then in this, the second part of the slide is all of the reasons, you know, what are those problems that you might have experienced? And this is part of the help stream. And what's tricky, again, going back to that synergistic slide that I had, is this because of brain injury or is this because of other things going on? And it's really hard to tell. Bottom line is, it's really hard to tell. You know, difficulty with focusing or concentrating, is that brain injury? Is that because of their situation? Feeling anxiety or depression, could be brain injury. It could be a host of other things. Headaches was another really high number, where we had the 85.8%. Again, with all that being said, it's hard to figure out, is this brain injury or is this other stuff? Again, asking the question, could it be brain injury, is really what we're trying to get at with these questions. Because I can tell you, all the programs that we worked with said brain injury wasn't even on their radar, hadn't even thought about it until we brought this to their attention. So for that, we've been, you know, thankful that they've appreciated the information, and those that are working with us on this project have kind of changed their way of doing things because of that. Kind of, where do we go from here? Again, that was just a short project that we had done. Being able to say 60% of these ladies are screening positive for brain injury has allowed us here in Nebraska to go after some other grants. Data drives policy, we're hoping, but data drive also helps kind of drive some direction for finding more funding. Here in Nebraska, there's this group called it's the Women Investing in Nebraska grant, and we've been very fortunate to be the recipients of that grant. It started in October 2017 and will run through this next year, or through 2018. And with that, we have continued our work in this particular area, working with the shelters, but also expanding to do more training and education with healthcare providers. Some of the clinics here in town that one would think they should understand and pay attention to brain injury, but reality is that's not always the case. So we go in and do some training about domestic violence and brain injury. The other group that has certainly embraced some of our information has been with the legal system, trying to work with probation and parole and attorneys. Right now we're in conversations here, because I live in Lincoln, with the Lincoln Police Department, to encourage them, would you be interested or willing to do some brain injury screening too? And there's certainly been a strong interest for that. We actually partnered with the university to do some, for those that are screening positive within a couple of our programs, we're actually asking those ladies, if you screen positive, would you be willing to go in and or meet with us and have a neuropsych assessment? This neuropsych assessment is not, again, we're not going in there and saying, okay, we're diagnosing you, but it's about a 90-minute assessment. And we're gathering that information, actually working with CDC right now to do some follow-up questions with those ladies who have agreed to go through that assessment and looking at some long-term outcomes. And so that's been exciting for us. I know we did we partnered with the University of Omaha School of Criminology and Criminal Justice to say, would you partner with us to do like a half-day training on domestic violence and brain injury, and open it up to what does the legal system need to know? And they were very willing to help us with that. And maybe this isn't a lot, but here in Nebraska, it's a lot. We're a very rural state, but we had 250 participants sign up for that training. A lot of them, again, were probation and parole. Again, in my world, in the brain injury world, really looking for those non-traditional partners. I think so oftentimes we think our partners are the hospitals or the clinics, but it's been really neat to see how the legal system is embracing this for us here in Nebraska and wanting to learn more. And same with mental health. How many of these individuals are oftentimes diagnosed with mental health illnesses? And at this point in time, we're having quite a bit more conversation with our mental health community saying, can we do some cross-training? What do you guys know about brain injury? And most of them are like, nothing. We don't know what to do with these individuals. So it's been a really good opportunity to open up some doors. And all because 60% is just kind of like mind-boggling. So it's been a good project. On that note, here's my last slide with my information and a little bit, and Peg's information to be happy to take any questions. Jim Abrams had asked, I may have missed it, but does your screening go both ways for male and female? Yeah, this screening questionnaire, it's non-gender specific, so certainly males and females can both can use that screen. Ingrid has asked, on the slide E, when participants reported how it happened, the second highest reason for TBI was lack of oxygen. Is it okay to infer this was due to domestic violence, such as strangulation, or are there other factors? You know, it could be that they had a heart attack. It could be that there was a near drowning. We were making, and it could be erroneous assumptions that it was because of domestic violence, because we didn't go into asking those other questions about how or why did you have that lack of oxygen. So there are, and certainly our screen isn't perfect. It's easy to say that. Okay, the other question is, have you had resistance in the community when trying to develop partnerships for helping to do the screenings? I think the biggest resistance, it's not even a resistance to doing them, it's more of a, then what? Okay, so we screen positive, then what? And again, here in Nebraska, we don't have a lot of brain injury services, and that's the beginning of my presentation, is like, we've got to do a better job improving our services. And so right now, the ones that are looking at doing the screening, the ones that we're encouraging and we're in conversations, and it's a bit of a commitment. The ones that I'm hoping and that seem willing to do the screens is the Lincoln Police Department. We're also talking with probation. They've asked us to come in and do some training and help them create some modules. So probation throughout the state has been interested. There is one clinic, a walk-in clinic that we've done some training with, encouraging them to do it, and they're kind of like, not feeling quite equipped to know what to do. The other thing that we've talked with them about is saying, if you do these screenings, would you be, the then what? We have a small staff, or staff of 2.5, covering statewide, but we have a couple of individuals that are doing what we call resource facilitation. Some of you probably have that within your state. But what we are encouraging them to do is contact our resource facilitator and see, can we help get you hooked up to the resources that do exist for brain injury in our state. So I think there's potential there. Also, some conversation I had with the mental health programs just this week, saying, oh, geez, yeah, we need to be screening for this too, and let's start looking at what your screening tools are. The other screens that we're maybe looking at, if it's not specific to domestic violence, it's just, some of you may be aware of this, is the OSU TBI screen, the Ohio State University TBI screen. Ask a different set of questions. What we liked about the helps that we could modify it specifically. We thought we did a good job creating it just for domestic violence. And then Rebecca has asked, is there a different agency that works with tribal liaisons? And what do you do to address non-English speakers? Here in Nebraska, these are really small projects we're working on. We have not dove into working with tribes at this point. The projects that are the small grant funding that we've had is we're just working directly with shelters in those specific areas. So we have not. I definitely think there's probably a need for that. When we, how do we address the non-English speakers? Right now, the shelters are the ones that actually do the screening questions. So I'm making the assumption that they're figuring out, they've got to fill out the rest of their paperwork, so they're modifying and utilizing their language lines for that too. And then another question is, you mentioned people getting mental health diagnosis when actually having brain injury. Do you have any statistics or numbers for that? I do not. I do not have statistics or numbers on that yet. Again, one of the conversations I had 2 hours ago was with a program here in Nebraska called Region 5 that does a lot of our mental health stuff. And they're like, yeah, we need more information, and what can we do to partner, and bring us your screens when we meet, in a couple weeks. So we're hoping to get there. And I'm guessing there's some numbers out there somewhere, and I, Peggy Reisher, just don't have them. So you got my knowledge right now. So, and it looks like that was the last of the questions that I can see, unless anybody else has anything. So I got done a little bit early, unless there was other questions. But Devin, you might be able to help me out with that. Oh wait, looks like I need to scroll down a little bit. I got one more question. Jennifer is asking, can you tell us more about the children of the people you serve? I can tell you, again, this is a pretty small project. When we were going in and doing our training, really preaching to them, in a sense, about, okay, if this is happening to the adult in the house, who's to say that it's not happening to the kids? Encouraging them to really be looking at that or looking for that. But I can tell you, we didn't collect any data on that at this point. We had on the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska website, we have put together a video called Forever Shaken. It's I think a pretty powerful 30-minute video talking about abusive head trauma. And what we would do when we went in and worked with the domestic violence programs is we would leave a whole stack of those DVDs and say, can you incorporate this into some of the work that you are doing? Because the idea behind Forever Shaken, it tells a story of 4 children here in Nebraska who were shaken as babies. And the reason we produced it in partnership with a couple whose daughter was shaken, Tiffany and Brandon Brazil. Their daughter Alexis was shaken by a daycare provider, and she ended up being one of my patients at Madonna. And they were videographers, and they essentially created and videographed her recovery story. She's still in the work process years later trying to recover, but they would be that family that would oftentimes get told, or they had a passion to go out and do training on what's abusive head trauma, what's shaken baby. And they were going around all the schools. I'm like, that's like house cleaning. You're never done. So would you be willing to put together a video? And the idea behind the video is to give more of a powerful impact on an emotional reaction to abusive head trauma. So frequently in the news we hear about the perpetrator. We don't hear about the lives that have been changed because of the shaken. So, did we directly work with the children at this point? No. I can tell you that one of the other projects we're working on the side is with just some juvenile justice work and trying to identify kids with developmental disability and brain injury. How many of those are within the juvenile justice system? And I know there's a lot of other folks that are working in that area too, a lot of other states that are. But as we go and do our trainings with probation and parole and the legal system, we definitely talk about how is this affecting the kids too. But certainly our project did not collect numbers on that yet. And then the last question Ingrid asked is, does Nebraska have a core VIP program? And we do. And if Peg was here, she could tell you all about that. All I know is enough to say, yes, we have it, but I don't know a lot of the details because that's where I usually let Peg kind of manage those things. Any other questions? I'd be happy to answer. I could talk about this stuff all day, and you don't want to listen to me talk about it all day. I appreciate your attention. Okay, one more question. Any research on how the long-term effects for untreated DV who had the 6 or plus brain injuries? How does the fact that these injuries happened over a course of several years or many years have an influence? And one of the things that we're doing with this new set of funding, I can tell you that we did not dive into that at this point. We did not do a lot of research in that area. When we were putting together this presentation to give to the programs, I can tell you there's just not a lot of research out there about domestic violence and brain injury. We really struggled to find that. And I think that is why at this point in time, even like I said, the CDC is wanting to provide us some technical assistance because they're like, yeah, there's just not a lot out there. So one of the things we're adding into our particular project, and all of this becomes about the funding piece, but in partnering with the university, one of our researchers has some access to going in and doing some scanning, same stuff that they're utilizing for football players, some imaging. And so our goal within this year is to get at least 5 of those ladies willing to go in and let us do some further scanning and seeing, what's the results look like on that end. And I think that could be very powerful. How is the matter, has the white matter and the gray matter changed? But right now we don't have that. And in talking with CDC, and some of the other researchers in this particular area across the United States, there's just not been a lot of work done in that area. Certainly if anyone on this call has information, I would love to hear what you know about it. We've presented on this even at a national level, and again, it appears as though there's not a lot of focus at this point. So we're hoping, one of the things that some of the researchers or the neuropsych folks that are partnering with me to do the neuropsych assessments, we're in the conversations right now about trying to write for some NIH grants, the National Institute of Health grants, and seeing if we could do some studies on this long-term, look at 10, 15 years down the road. But right now I don't have that stuff. So, but those are great questions.